Well, I'd also add into those calculations that we've never had this a flow of information happening so rapidly from every corner of the world. And it just keeps accelerating. And it's like, I don't think we've been designed to handle this psychologically. And given that we're always putting our attention to problems, it's almost like you hear an outlier of something that'll grab your attention and can consume you. And even if you look at, the social media platforms, of course, there's a lot of talks about that, but things that you're being fed reflects what your current narrative is. So you're kind of having a feedback loop on everything. Should we be escaping that? I mean, should we be using certain strategies to kind of mitigate this exposure?
It's funny. If you read Subtle Art, so Subtle Art was written in like 2015, 2014, 2015. I'm pretty hard on social media and Subtle Art. And then in Everything is Fucked, I'm actually quite silent about social media. I don't say much about it. And then honestly, in the last year or so, I've unintentionally, and definitely like I don't want to be, but I've kind of unintentionally become a bit of a defender of social media, just because I think it's becoming the scapegoat for all this. Like, if I was to boil everything down into like 2 or 3 sentences, this is what I would say. You know, there's always a percentage of the population that thinks the world is ending and thinks everything is going wrong. Like, that's just a fact. It's always been the case. It's always going to be the case. The difference now is that social media makes that cohort of people in the population much, much, much more visible than they were before. It used to be when we were kids, if there was a crazy person who thought there was like a conspiracy to overthrow the government and take over the world, like, you never heard from them. You never, unless you like physically met them and talked to them and the subject came up, you never heard about it. But just due to the way the internet works, not just social media, but the entire internet, you hear about those people a lot more often. And so it creates this perception that these things are growing or that they're becoming more common. But if you look at the data, they're actually not. If you look at mental health data, like, mental health is like the technology is not what's responsible for the mental health problems. The technology is not what's responsible for radicalization. It's just the technology is making these things much more visible to the average person. So it's like, you used to not know that there were so many anxious people in the world. Now now due to Facebook and Twitter, you're aware of 100 times more people. Therefore, you're aware of 100 times more anxious people. There's not more crazy conspiracy theorists in the world, but now you're aware of 100 times more people, so now you're aware of 100 times more conspiracy theorists. I do think the technology needs to be managed, but it's like, look, you're not like if you look at any era of media or technology, like every medium has its own problems. If you go back to like television was all fucked up. Like, when I was a kid, people thought television was like ruining people's lives. If you go back to when my parents were kids, they thought, rock music on the radio was ruining people's lives. So it's like, if you go back like 500 years, people thought that the printing press, the fact that kids didn't have to copy a book by hand from another book to read it was like going to ruin people's lives. So it's like, again, I'm going to come back to the point that it's like, people always think whatever's happening today is ruining everything, and that things in the past were better and things in the future are going to be worse. This is just the default human psychological, setting. And it requires conscious effort to step out of that and to recognize that is usually going to be incorrect.